Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is another video that is very overexposed because of the sun, but it is what it is. I never claim to offer YouTube very high quality videos, but welcome back to my channel. This will be a reading wrap up for some of the books that I've read in 2021. Now, when I say books, I don't really mean full length novels, because most of the things that I've been reading are short essays, short nonfiction essays, and I've been very selective about what I've been reading this year, because last year I read a little too much. None of it was too good, and I just have been really picky. So my notes are kind of all over the place. I did some of my reviews on Insta stories, and I can't really access them because I'm filming on my phone. Some of the detailed reviews are on Goodreads. Some of them are here in this Elmo notebook. The first book that I will be talking about is called We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly because it is a bit of a mouthful, but this was a reread for me. This is a book that I had read a couple of years ago when it came out, and even then I was like, okay, this is nothing too exciting, because it's basically her TED Talk converted into a little book. And when I read it, I was like, okay, this is a good introduction to feminism. And recently my husband and I were talking about feminism, and I thought that I'd recommend this book to him. So before recommending it, I thought I'll just go over it once again. And when I did, I didn't really think that this book is worth recommending to him, especially because, like, if you are already familiar with the concepts of feminism, then this book will not really add much to your knowledge, because it's, again, oversimplistic, very basic. You can't really take away too much from it, because these things are like things that they're pretty much like common knowledge. But one of the things about feminism is, or discussions around feminism, is that it has a very negative connotation, and most people don't really know the essence of the feminism that we talk about today, because they associate it with the brow burning movements of the second waves of feminism. So discussions around feminism, I think, are important, because you kind of have to put across that what feminism means is equality, not like man versus woman or woman versus man. But this is a book that I would not recommend to someone who has that knowledge already. But if you're someone who are just looking for an introduction, I think this book could be beneficial to you. So upon my first read, I gave it 3 stars, and upon my reread, I did not change my rating. I was tempted to lower it a little bit, but I didn't really do anything with it. So for me, it's pretty much a 3-star book. Also, I've been living under a rock recently, and someone on my Insta stories commented that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has been saying some things which are considered problematic, and I tried to look up the issue, but a lot of it was like he said, she said, he said, she said. So if you are someone who is familiar with Adichie's recent statements, please let me know, and let me know where readers stand on this issue. Like, are people not reading her books anymore because they consider her to be harmful? Like, I honestly don't know, and I would kind of like to understand what is going on. So the next book that I will be talking about is called The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang, a contemporary romance novel. Now, contemporary romance is usually not my thing, but every now and then I really like to, dip into a soft-hearted, wholesome romance novel, because I do enjoy them from time to time. And this is a book that I've been especially looking forward to reading, because it's part of a trilogy by Helen Hoang, and I really enjoyed the first 2. I really liked The Kiss Quotient, and I really enjoyed The Bright Test. And all of these books, there's a character who is struggling with autism. So I enjoyed the first 2, and this one was the one that I was looking for, because I really wanted to read about the main character. So Kwan is a side character in the first 2 books, and this was a book supposed to be about his love story and how he kind of found a nice wholesome partner. And most of the time I just felt really frustrated with this book. Like, it was not what I was looking for. I read the author's note, and she kind of said that this is a book about her and her experiences with autism. It's kind of difficult to criticize this book if the author goes and says that this is about her, but the romance in this book was so off. I feel like the characters were not evenly matched. They didn't really seem like compatible partners to me, because it's about Kwan, who is recovering from a surgery. This is a surgery that we didn't really hear about in the first 2 books, and it was kind of just glossed over in the third book, and we're like, oh wait, Kwan is really struggling with his health, so I would like to know more about that. And it was about Anna, who is recently, as an adult, been diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum, and the two characters were dealing with their own things, which is fine. Like, that's how life is. Everybody has things to deal with. But on the page, it kind of really, really frustrated me because it was a mismatched relationship of two people with different needs, and it kind of assumed the role of a caretaker, like a caretaker and someone who needs help, rather than it being a relationship of equals where they can kind of, I don't know, be partners and help each other out. And that's where I felt frustrated with the book, because most of the book was about Anna and her diagnosis and her mental illness and how she fell into the role of a caretaker of her father, but she was not in a position to take care of anyone. And Kwan ended up being the person to take care of her. And I just felt very odd about the whole relationship because the dynamics to me were really, really off. Now, Helen Huang does really write explicit scenes because, you know, they're romance novels, so she does add a lot of explicit scenes to her books, which is not a problem with me. I enjoy reading them, but in this book they felt so forced and kind of were like, usually her books are very consent heavy, and that's what I enjoy about them because the characters are kind of getting to know each other. This one felt very off. Like, while I'm saying there's no explicit assault scenes or things like that, but kind of consent, to me it felt like a bit of a gray area. It almost felt like a forced interaction, and that's something that I really didn't enjoy about this book. So I give this book 2 stars, and I honestly think that Kwan deserved a better story. The next book that I'll be talking about is called Tomorrow Sex Will Be Good Again. This is a non-fiction book. It's not an instruction manual of any kind, so in case you're looking for that kind of information, it's not about how to improve a certain aspect of your life. But basically this book is very academic in nature, and it talks about the consent culture or different elements of the consent culture. It basically touched upon 4 topics of consent and desire, arousal, and vulnerability, especially from the point of view of women, mostly cisgender heterosexual women. And it kind of talks about all of this in light of the Me Too movement. So I enjoyed the book. Like, I enjoyed reading this book, but this is one of those books that even though it's like a little over 100 pages, it's very dense. There were parts of it that I kind of had to reread, and this is one of those books that I buddy read with my husband, and we were kind of like mostly on the same page about it. Like, a lot of the things that she's talking about, she just goes off into a topic within a topic, and it's kind of hard to keep up with the discussions. But definitely a book that I would enjoy rereading because I just really found the politics around women's bodies very interesting, especially how you think of consent as something that's so black and white, like it's a yes and no issue, but looking at the history and how political it has been, it's really not. A lot more complicated, and I think the discussions around it were like nice to read about. They were enlightening. The next book I'll be talking about is also a non-fiction essay by Roxane Gay. This one's called Writing into the Wound, and I really enjoyed it. Like, I like Roxane Gay's writing. I really enjoyed when I read her memoir Hunger, which is basically about how she was gang raped at the age of 12, and then it permanently changed the relationship that she had with her own body, in that like she kept on eating and she became morbidly obese in order to protect herself. But this was a different kind of an essay because it was mostly about how people responded to her book and how journalists treated her in interviews after that, and it was about the writing classes that she gave, and basically just how her life was during the pandemic. So I enjoy her writing. This book was an hour worth of audiobook on script. That's probably around 30 pages of an essay, but I love Roxane Gay's writing. The next 2 books I'll be talking about are classics, and 2 very different classics. The first one is Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence, and the next one will be Persuasion by Jane Austen. So starting with this, Lady Chatterley's Lover. I read this book because I was kind of like curious about it, of course, but this book gets mentioned in a lot of like pop culture references, and you kind of hear about it, and it's hailed as like the first erotic classic. It's basically about a woman who is married to a man, and the man is basically disabled. I think like he loses functionality or function in the lower part of his body, and she basically goes and she has an affair with the gamekeeper of the house, which I think means a gardener in today's vocabulary. So this is a book that I reviewed in detail on Goodreads, and I basically said that I read it as a combination of an audiobook and a physical book, and the audiobook definitely made it easier to understand Mellors, the gamekeeper's Derbyshire accent, because in text it was kind of hard to read, and I was like, wait, I don't really know what he's saying. So I downloaded the audiobook, which kind of, made it an easier reading experience. I also said that it's hailed as an erotic classic with a lot of explicit content. And while the content is there, I found it neither particularly exciting nor did I find it entertaining. While there is a lot of sex in it, after a while it gets a little tiresome to read about. The characters were very well portrayed though, and I like the characters of Clifford, Sir Malcolm, and Mellors to be more interesting than the main character. As a protagonist, I found her very, very hard to like. So what I actually enjoyed about this book were the discussions on the difference between the classes, the rich versus the poor dichotomy, because that's what we kind of get when we look at the affair between the rich husband and the poor gamekeeper. I also enjoyed the discussions on the portrayal of immediate satisfaction from lustful relationships as opposed to the joy of finding long-lasting love. And I thought the book ended really, really well. For a classic, it was a pretty realistic ending for a story like this. But there are a few things that I would like to warn you about. If you're sensitive to language, then the F word and the C word are liberally used. There's a whole discussion about the C word. So just know that going in. And also, because this is a book that was written a while ago, it has homophobic and racist content. So just know that before going in. And the last book that I would like to talk about is Persuasion by Jane Austen. I am a late bloomer when it comes to Jane Austen because I never really understood her writing until a couple of years ago. Persuasion was the first Jane Austen book that I ever read, and it just went over my head because I read it as a buddy read with two very experienced readers who were familiar with Austen's work, and that experience kind of left like me feeling a little inadequate, let's just say, because I didn't really enjoy the book. But I started reading more of Jane Austen. I read Pride and Prejudice, and I read Emma, and I read Northanger Abbey, and I was like, wait, maybe it's time to revisit Persuasion. I'm really glad to say that I really loved it this time around. Because I'm more familiar with her writing style, I enjoyed the book. I thought it was a very sweet love story. The letter at the end of Persuasion is very famous, and the whole book I was kind of like hoping for that, but I started enjoying the journey so much more. Like, I think Anne Elliot is such an interesting character, and Jane Austen's worlds are always like interesting. The societies that she sets up, the people, the funny characters. Like, her dad is a bit of a character, and so are her sisters. But I just thought the character of Anne was really, really interesting, and I just enjoyed the reunification of the two people who were like in love before, but they couldn't get together. And at the end of the book, when I finally reached the letter, it was just like a good reading experience, very wholesome. But yeah, I think that's it for this wrap up. Let me know if you have any thoughts and comments about any of the things that I've said. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.